So thank you for coming. So we don't end up taking too much time of David's time in the workshop or the session here. My name is Mei-Zhang Lee. I work in the Intercultural International Student Services Office. I'm the program coordinator. Before we kind of get started here, I just want to say thank you to this week's sponsors, which include Academic Affairs, CSB Campus Ministry, CSB Sustainability Office, the CSB SJU Libraries, the McCarthy Center, Fine Arts Programming, IISS, JEC, the Coach Chair in Catholic Thought and Culture, the Math Department, PRISM, RAD, the School of Theology, and SJU Theology on Tap. If you have any time tonight or the rest of this week, we are still doing other activities for the MLK week. Tonight is Outlier, the story of Katherine Johnson, climate change and justice for our beloved community on Thursday. And then on Friday night, we have RAD with their performance in Drowning Voices, Can You Hear Me? And Saturday, JEC will be showcasing Saturday Church. And now we have David DeBlieck. He is a visiting assistant professor in the theater department. His session will cover Katherine Dunham, a legacy of social activism through dance. A little bit about Katherine Dunham. She was an internationally recognized dance artist, social activist, and cultural anthropologist who changed the face of the American dance stage by incorporating dances from the African diaspora in her choreography and by presenting dance works that explicitly address social issues in her time. This session will also review aspects of Dunham's work, including an examination of Southland, a dance from 1950 that depicted the lynching of a black man in the racist American South. Furthermore, the session will explore how Dunham's legacy is continued through the Institute of Dunham Technique Certification and the training of today's dancer in her African-based dance technique, as well as her social philosophies. And then David will also explain how he plans to apply Dunham's strategies and theories to engage CSB SJU students in the creation of a new dance work that addresses themes of social justice. So again, thank you, and let's welcome David.
I'm going to just try to project, but if at any point you can't hear me, let me know and I'll go to the microphone. Wow, good afternoon. Thank you for being here to learn a little bit more about Katherine Dunham. As Mei-Zhang said, she's a very important, influential American dance artist, anthropologist, and social activist, all in one human. I want to just start by maybe a show of hands. How many of you know a little bit about Katherine Dunham already or her work? Great, so not much, awesome. Then you're in the right place. Good. I want to give a little special acknowledgement to the students from my Introduction to Modern Dance class for being here today. Showing up in human clothes, like a regular class, instead of dancing together. So thanks for being here to honor Dunham's legacy. So today, I want to share some details about Miss Dunham's activism. Through a couple different arenas. One, just through the kinds of dances and the dancing bodies that she put on stage. Secondly, through her teaching philosophies, how she approached training the full kind of human dance artist. Thirdly, through her own personal platform, using her own prestige and fame to speak out against social issues that were important to her in her time. And then lastly, a really compelling example of a specific full-length dance work she created that explicitly addressed a really troubling social injustice during her lifetime. Okay. Hopefully you have a chance to kind of let these words soak in a little bit. The man who truly loves his country is the man who is able to see it in the bad as well as the good, and seeing the bad, reclaim it at the cost of liberty or life. This was a personal philosophy of hers. These were words she spoke to the audience in 1951 at the premiere of her dance work Southland in Santiago, Chile. That piece ended up being very controversial and actually really changed the trajectory of her own career and also the future of her dance company. Yeah. She spoke these words actually in Spanish when she gave it to the audience as a pre-show speech, but this is the English translation. So I'm going to talk about Southland a little later as an example of her social activism, but I want to start first with a little overview just of her life's work so we kind of have a sense of who Katherine Dunham was. picture of her. I want to actually start by telling you a little bit about my personal association with Katherine Dunham. I first encountered her in the mid-1990s. I was a graduate student in dance at the University of Hawaii, and Miss Dunham was asked to come speak on campus as a guest lecturer. So she was in her 80s at the time. I had just really started studying dance history, so I didn't realize what an important and influential person she was. I do remember sitting in the audience and marveling at these fantastical life stories that she told, and also these reflections, philosophical reflections on dance and humanity. A couple years later, also in Hawaii, I participated in a summer workshop taught by Halifu Osmare, who is a certified master teacher of the Dunham Technique. She's also a really celebrated scholar who has written about Dunham, but also other African-based dance forms. So I got to experience in my body some of Katherine Dunham's work and her technique, which is based on a fusion of some African aesthetics with some elements of more European dance forms like ballet and modern dance. I got to experience the suppleness and fluidity of the spine that's in her work, and also just the really acute isolations of shoulders, head, neck, chest, torso that are part of that technique. A little while later, when I started teaching dance history and the history of musical theater, dance and musical theater, I started incorporating some of Dunham's work in my lesson plan. So I did a little more research on just who she was as a dance artist and how she changed things in the dance world. And then finally, last summer, with support from our colleges, I traveled to Chicago for a week-long intensive that was held by the Institute for Dunham Technique Certification. Okay? And it was intense. We had 5 90-minute dance classes a day. Okay, so just let that sink in. Usually with a studio full of sweaty bodies and live drummers. All the dance classes had live drumming, sometimes 5, 6, 7 live drummers. So it was very intense. I limped home to my hotel room that night. Luckily, I was part of an educator track, so there were 12 of us who are teachers that had some separate sessions where we kind of delved into the history and theories of Dunham, in addition to the dance classes we had. The dance classes, some of them were in Dunham's signature technique, but then we also took some African dance classes and Haitian dance classes and even Sri Lankan dance class as well. And as part of that, as part of our educator track, we talked about Dunham as a social activist, and we did a composition exercise where we had to start to create a dance for ourselves based on a social issue that was important to us. So after limping home, then I had to, in my hotel room, do a little choreography each night as well, and we kind of shared those all together. Let's see. So you can kind of see that my perspective on Dunham's work is really as a practicing dance artist and teacher, not so much as a scholar and historian, but instead kind of interested in how her work and theories intersect or could influence my own practice as a dance artist and teacher, and influence the work with my dance students. Let's look a little bit at her biography now. So, and kind of get a sense of how she was important in the American dance scene. So she, at age 20, she entered the University of Chicago, and right after that formed her first dance company, Ballet Negre, which is kind of considered by most to be the first all African-American dance company of significance in our country. She discovered a love for learning about other cultures and anthropology, and was awarded a fellowship to go work in the Caribbean to immerse herself in the culture there and to learn some of the culture's dances. And eventually got her degree in social anthropology. And then, right around the same time, presented her first full-length ballets. So you kind of see she kind of had that bridge between scholar and artist from the very start. And ultimately decided she wanted to go in the direction of being a dance artist. Even though she practiced as an anthropologist, she decided not to go on for advanced studies in anthropology. Then she got pretty famous. She formed the Dunham Company and created choreography for both Broadway. She did a Broadway musical called Cabin in the Sky, where she collaborated with George Balanchine on the choreography. And then also for Hollywood, probably the most well-known of her films that she did choreography for is called Stormy Weather, and her company performed in that film as well. Significant that she married her lifelong partner and husband, John Pratt. He was also the costume designer. He designed every costume she ever wore in film or on stage. In 1944, she opened a school in New York City, the Dunham School of Dance and Theater, that offered many different types of dance styles. Some pretty famous students. Eartha Kitt took classes with her. James Dean took classes with her, if you know those popular icons. And then her company really took off. She was kind of the hot ticket at this time, and her company toured throughout America, but also internationally. Until 1965, it takes a lot to keep a dance company going. And after sort of struggling for years to maintain a dance company, the company had their final performance in Harlem in 1965. So, probably what was most significant about Dunham's work is that she was bringing African-based dance styles to the American concert dance stage and to also film and Broadway. At a time, if you think sort of when she started working in the 30s, it's a sort of early Broadway, and a lot of the African-American musicals of that time were sort of more entertainment-based, kind of coming out of the legacy of minstrelsy and real stereotypical kind of representations of African Americans. If you know, are familiar with Josephine Baker, another really popular dance artist of the time, who was more in the cabaret scene and sort of almost creating an exoticized sort of notion of primitivism, or what it was to be a black dancing body. Where Dunham was really interested as an anthropologist in sort of what she thought of as authentic transformations of dances from various cultures in their everyday life to the stage, with the goal of educating people, sharing cultural knowledge about dance forms they might not be familiar with, and what the purpose of those dance forms was in their everyday context. So let's see one of those dances. So we're going to watch a little clip of a dance called Shango, that is based on a ritual toward an African deity in the Caribbean. And we'll hear a little bit of Katherine Dunham later in her life. Did a lot of video interviews, so we have this trove of her speaking. And she'll talk a little bit about the meaning of Shango in its everyday context and the process of transferring that to the stage. And then we'll watch an actual clip of her. All right, tech moment here. So this is Miss Dunham talking about Shango.
They were vivid, colorful, and so forth, but Shango, you knew there would be something that would be extraordinary, that would be very strong and very powerful. Shango is one of the gods from Africa that has been maintained through the Caribbean, through the entire African diaspora. Shango is very strong, god that one associated with an iron will and a determination that they could bring things about, bring them to happen for good or for bad if needed. And I'd say Shango was probably the strongest of the African gods. And he was worshipped all through the Caribbean and South America. And every place that I went, a Shango ceremony was bound to be an important one. You know, you might have one to Agwe or Ogun or whatever, and they were vivid, colorful, and so forth. But Shango, you knew there would be something that would be extraordinary, that would be very strong and very powerful. And our Shango was a combination of a boy possessed, if you saw this on stage, a boy possessed by Damballa, who is the serpent god, and who is my lead god. The boy was possessed with Damballa, but Shango was the god who came in and really, really took over the whole ceremony.
Let's watch a little bit. So she created this dance in the late 30s, I believe, and this is the company performing it in the 40s. Anything catch your eye or surprise you? Engage you? I'll just point out that just by the types of dances she brought to the stage, and by bringing brown and black dancing bodies to the stage, she was shifting the social landscape of the time, and particularly what was on the American dance stage. And again, sort of with this idea of bringing authentic transformations of dances in their actual cultural context versus sort of a more entertainment-geared translation of them. Let's look just a little further at the rest of her career. Let's actually do this. I want to talk a little bit about how Katherine Dunham used her own personal platform and fame to speak out against some social issues. So she toured extensively with her company, and in doing so faced some pretty racist environments. This was the time of segregation in the United States still. So when her company performed, particularly in the South, they were performing at theaters that were segregated, where black people were not allowed to sit in the orchestra or be in the theater at all. She also faced situations where she couldn't find quality hotel lodging for her company sometimes, or was refused entrance into hotels herself, even as famous as she was. And so she used her fame at that time to speak out against some of these issues. And this next clip is actually, she talks about a time, I believe it's in Louisville, Kentucky, where she addressed the audience directly about this issue of segregation in their theater. This is, she's speaking at Jacob's Pillow, which is what my class knows a little bit about Jacob's Pillow. Right.
I was in Lexington, Kentucky, and the audience was totally segregated. I did not, foolishly, I didn't think about it because I was so busy with the company, and that has saved me so many, many times. I was just too busy to get into what I considered the small things. It turned out to be a big thing. It turned out that no black people could sit in the orchestra seats. And I, after going through a whole lot of resistance, threats, you name it. I did everything possible to be able to get on that stage and feel good about it. And I couldn't win then. Therefore, I decided if I couldn't win at the beginning, I'd win at the end. I did the show. They loved it. Maybe the show was better than it had ever been because everybody was uptight. And in the end, I told them we would never come back until we could appear before people who were sitting next to each other. People of my color were sitting next to people of your color. A lot of people in the audience didn't know it. They had no idea that this was the case. And this is one thing I have to say, you have to be very, very careful about racism. There is conscious, active, violent racism. There's a kind of racism that is simply pure ignorance. People just don't know. And they don't know, and they don't think, and they follow. And all of a sudden, they're faced with something which is against their Christian principles, social values, everything. But they did not know that until it was put before them. That night, I decided to put this before them. Pinned on the back of one of my fancy little skirts. No whites allowed. I think that's what it said. Which was sort of a rude thing to do, I know. But I was so upset. And I said at the end, you know, until we could sit next to you, I wouldn't come back. And then after that, they got to thinking about it, and they said, well, we want Paul Robeson, we want Marian Anderson, so we better get ourselves together. And they got themselves together, and they sat next to each other, and none of it rubbed off, so they were very happy.
Dunham, making a personal stand against social injustices of her time, at the cost of liberty or life, that first quote. You know, knowing full well she's risking the well-being of her dance company or sort of the viability or their opportunities to tour, right? But it was so important to her. She really felt she wasn't living a full life if she didn't stand for the things she believed in. So, last little stage here. After her company disbanded, her main focus was as a teacher, as an educator. She moved to East St. Louis, Missouri, in part of the city that was very low socioeconomic status, a lot of hardship and violence and poverty, and created the Performing Arts Training Center with a focus on training youth in dance and also her other life philosophies as a way to give them opportunities to rise above the hardships that they faced. She received a Kennedy Center Award. Was also named at one point as one of America's irreplaceable treasures, dance treasures. I want to kind of point out too, in 1992, another time that she took a stand as herself, a personal stand, was when Haiti, there had been a coup d'etat and the leader had been overthrown. You might recall there were a large number of Haitian refugees that were held at Guantanamo Bay and treated very poorly. Some of them treated poorly and barred access because of their HIV status at the time. And so Dunham went on a hunger fast, I'd say it was like for 47 days, to kind of protest the treatment of the refugees. I believe the ousted leader, Baptiste, does anyone want to confirm that for me? And I think Jesse Jackson together came to ask her to stop the hunger fast, kind of stood in solidarity with her. One other incident where she stood for something that she believed in, this is from 1967. Shortly after forming the Institute, she stood up for one of her students who was falsely arrested. And this is a little article from the New York Times that tells just a little bit about this news story about her actually being jailed, this really famous person being jailed. Katherine Dunham, Negro dancer and artist in residence at Southern Illinois University, was charged with disorderly conduct last night when she objected to the booking of one of her students as a suspect in recent racial disorders. The police said Miss Dunham had been asked to leave the booking office at police headquarters when she became irate, but that she had refused to do so. An officer picked her up and carried her to a second-floor cell where she spent 3.5 hours before she was released on bond. Miss Dunham said, "When I asked what the charges against Daryl were, I was told to mind my own business. One cop started pushing me around and 2 other pig cops started twisting my arms. I asked if I were under arrest and they said, 'You sure are.'" So this was in the New York Times. It's a big enough story from East St. Louis. Again, an instance of her standing up against the social injustice. Any questions or comments before we move on? I want to talk just a little bit about Ms. Dunham's teaching philosophies, because I think they also represent her interest in social activism. So 3 main philosophies that she espoused were form and function, socialization through the arts, and intercultural communication. Form and function basically meant going beyond the steps, but investigating what meaning a dance had in its cultural origins. For me, that also means providing relevance for my students. If I'm teaching dance, of like, how does this connect to their life experience, how they see the world, in addition to just learning the dance steps. Here's a quote from Katherine Dunham. She wrote extensively about her philosophies and experiences. This is a great collection of writings by her and other people that have written about her. But she published quite a bit in her lifetime as well. She's quite an accomplished writer. This is her writing about form and function. Dance teachers, and even performers, are usually unconcerned with the function of dance. Instead, they are concerned largely with its aesthetic principles, its technique, the ideology of modern forms, and the form of the choreography. As an anthropologist, however, I became increasingly interested in the functions of dance. I realized the importance of observing the interrelation of form and function as it expressed itself in such a context. Socialization through the arts, I would just kind of boil down to developing the whole person through the Dunham technique. Not just the body, but mental, emotional, and spiritual part of a person as well. And here's something that she had to say that relates to this. After many efforts to arrive at some conclusive decision when thinking of dance, I have decided upon this, that dance is not a technique, but a social act. And that dance should return to where it first came from, which is the heart and soul of man and man's social living. Not just art, but a social act. And then finally, intercultural communication. I hear the term on campus a lot of cultural agility, or cultural competency, or intercultural competency. I think this is basically what she's getting at. This awareness that a multitude of cultures exist, and being able to navigate interculturally. A quote from Ms. Dunham. So, part of the roots of Dunham technique are in knowing that there are infinite cultures, more than we know or will ever know. Infinite people, infinite ways of thinking, ways of living, ways of dancing, ways of doing that we must learn how to not only accept, but to know and understand. So for me, I mean, I've been in a lot of dance classes where, I don't know, the teacher doesn't really talk about anything except what the counts and steps are, right? So this was a very kind of radical approach to dance training, to incorporate the whole human person in the technique. Okay, I'm going to switch to this one example that I find really compelling of a dance work that was very controversial in its time, that directly addressed a social issue. And the name of the dance is Southland. As I mentioned, it premiered in 1951 in Santiago, Chile, and it depicted, as Mei-Jean said in her introduction, the wrongful lynching and burning of a black man who was falsely accused of raping a white woman. Okay, it was a full evening-length piece with original. She worked with a music composer to create it. It was really an intense experience for her company to create that dance, and it was immediately controversial. She was kind of informally considered a bit of a diplomat for the United States, a cultural diplomat, informally. And the US State Department and other leaders in Chile were really a bit outraged that she had done this work. The press was basically barred from writing reviews about the work. Told that they wouldn't exist any longer if their newspaper wrote a review of the work. Her company was pretty much shuffled right out of Chile. And in their next performance in Argentina, they weren't allowed to present the work of Southland. Controversial as it was. So let's look at a few details of what got people up in arms over this one. So this is sort of a scene breakdown. It starts with the whole ensemble. There's actually a big southern plantation mansion on stage. And it's sort of a nostalgic look at the South. A lot of plantation dances of the African diaspora, songs. The company had a lot in its repertoire already that was part of that. The mansion kind of went away and revealed this large magnolia tree on stage. And we see these two lovers, bless you, two field hands, two black field hands, Lucy and Richard. And it's sort of a sweet scene, and he picks a flower for her. They go away, and another couple, a white couple of brothers, Lenwood and Julie, and they're kind of taunting each other, and Julie ridicules Lenwood in a way that he takes great offense at, and ends up assaulting her and choking her until she's unconscious and left on stage, and he exits. The field hands come back on, and Richard decides to try to help her. Everyone has left and he's remaining. She comes to, and in this moment of panic, of embarrassment, rage, accuses him of raping her, starts to assemble this imaginary crowd, does this wild dance. It's described as a habanero, and I'm not exactly sure what that is, but I'd like to know. And in doing so, rips off part of her clothing and indicates that she's been strangled, and accuses him of rape. The crowd, in that moment, acts on that. He's forced off stage, and in this red light off stage, he is lynched and burned, and we see this swinging body come back on stage. Final scene is a kind of a street scene, it's sort of in a club. The funeral cortege carrying Richard's body passes through this area of town, and there's some dancers. There's a blind beggar. And when they see this burned body being carried through, the dancers cling tighter to each other. The blind man sees for the first time, he kind of sees what's going on, right, in the world. And there's this one lone character who has taken out a knife and just methodically stabs it into the floor over and over again, which was actually ended up being kind of what was one of the most controversial pieces of the dance for people. It represented resistance, pent-up anger, right? This suggestion that we're not going to take this anymore. And that was part of what was controversial about it. So intense dance, right? There's no video that exists of the dance, but there are some pictures. I'll show you. This is Lenwood and Julie. This is the accusation. And this is the funeral cortege. These are photos from the collection of Julie Robinson Belafonte, who was the only white dancer in the company at the time. Her last name Belafonte, you might recognize, she was married to the famous calypso singer, Harry Belafonte. It's a really intense process for her to play this role. She is screaming the one word of text that is spoken in the whole ballet, and it's really not a pretty word, it's an ugly word. It starts with an N. Caused a lot of strife that some of the dance company members said before this piece they didn't really kind of think about race or skin color, but suddenly they were aware of not only the white dancer, but the different shades of skin within the company. Imagine, it was a really intense, touring for them was sometimes a way to get away from some of the social injustices, particularly when they toured internationally. So this was kind of bringing domestic issues from home to the forefront. But Miss Dunham, she was outraged that lynching was still happening in the United States, and it happened well after this, right? This was also the time when our Congress failed to pass anti-lynching legislation. And so this was her way to use the stage to protest. She only did Southland one other time, 2 years later in Paris. Also caused a lot of controversy there, and it was never performed in America. Just a little bit about her process that sort of indicated how she approached this really heavy subject matter to put on stage in a dance. So as I said, she used vernacular or popular social dances fused with expressive gesture, that kind of mimetic gesture that kind of did some storytelling. It was a very collaborative process with the dancers themselves. She had a whole script written out that they started with, but they eventually took the words away once they had created a movement vocabulary with their bodies. The composer sat at the piano the whole time they were creating the musical structure and composition while they went. This all kind of led to what some of the dancers called method dancing. If you're familiar with the term method acting, it's sort of this authentic, really getting inside and really becoming the work, right, on an emotional level. And so this process of working collaboratively allowed the dancers to reach these levels of authentic intensity. All the characters in the dance were actually the names of the dancers. So Julie was Julie Robinson Belmonte, so allowed them to kind of personally connect with the work as well. And I would say kind of created this quasi-reality. This was this fictional tale of a lynching, but had some very elements of realism that made it very real for the audience, even though it was a fictional depiction. Kind of brought it out of just something in the past, but to something in the present. So, the controversy, she and her company really kind of fell out of favor with some powers at the time, particularly the U.S. Embassy and State Department. They were really never supported financially or in other ways that other dance companies at the time. Lesser known dance companies were given touring opportunities and formal status with the US government that Dunham's company never received. And just kind of changed, as I said, the trajectory of her career in the company. Not really having the opportunities that they might have had at the time because she presented this kind of work. Any questions about Southland? It's quite a compelling topic, I would say. Yeah, Jacob?
Has Southland been performed under different composers since then?
You know, my FYS students asked too, like, hasn't someone done it today? And I've not heard of it. I really want to ask, I'm planning to go back to do the Dunham workshop again this summer and want to ask her main followers if it has. This question came up with my FYS students today. Like they were having a group discussion. They read an article about Southland, and someone asked, "Well, do you think it would be powerful today?" Anyone have a take on if this kind of dance would be put on stage today? What it would say to us? If you're nodding your head, do you think yes?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I feel like there's more, like reoccurring, like even movies nowadays,
Yeah.
kind of like incorporate these ideas. So I feel like it would make a difference. I mean, it would educate people.
Yeah. Even just hearing descriptions of it, for me, kind of like, it wakes me up a little bit. If you listen to Reverend Dr. Tracy C. West's talk on Monday, she gave some very vivid descriptions of very violent racist acts, including lynchings and bombings and burnings, and really invoked us to remember, right? Remember truth, remember violence, remember those who are most vulnerable. Students said a really intriguing thing in my FYS class. They were like, well, if it was presented like this, it might just be seen as history, right? And kind of tuck it away as that was in the past. And someone said, well, what if it was like cops that were doing the violence today? Like if you kind of modernized it. Whoa, that might be very provocative to link it to sort of a more current racial tension. Other questions about Southland? Thanks. So just that quote I read earlier, I just really love this, the idea of dance being a social act, not just an art form. Let's see, Abby, anyone else here from the dance that we're going to be working on this spring? So as sort of I've devised this project. We have a dance production happening at the end of this semester, and one of the pieces that I will be directing, I'll be facilitating a process with a group of students to identify a social issue or social justice issue that's important to us, and we're going to collectively create a dance that says something we need to say. So kind of using some of the strategies that I learned through the Dunham workshop to do that. We don't know what the issue is. It could be kind of related issues. In terms of the process, of course we're going to start with lots of conversation about what social issues might be important to us and why. I also want to start by teaching a few dance moves that are sort of from dances of resistance, where that was their function, as sort of a base vocabulary that might spark our own imaginations of how we could create a dance of resistance or a dance of liberation. I'll show you just a couple moves that I learned. You can do this just sitting, so put your palms together and just separate them in an emphatic way. This is from a Haitian dance called Igbo. Anyone want to guess what this is sort of suggesting or what meaning it has in that dance? You can guess it. It represents the breaking of shackles. So you know that Haiti had a revolution. They resisted colonialization. A dance that kind of prepared them to cast off shackles. This is another one, just a little stirring. And then opposite of those shackles. Stir. And yeah. Stir up the energy, give them the medicine. Is what my Haitian dance teacher said. It was actually preparing for battle. A battle dance. So kind of maybe in capoeira is another dance of resistance. It's a fight disguised as a dance that slaves in Brazil originated as a way to train and practice for battle at a time when they didn't have power. So we may start with some of those and then move towards creating our own vocabulary. It'll be exciting. I have room for a few more dancers in that piece. If any of you in this room are interested in social issues or social justice and would like to investigate how we could say something with our dance, I've got a little notebook up here. You can come and talk to me or give me your email address and I'll let you know more information. The nice thing about creating a dance together is there's no particular technique or training we have to have. We can use the movement that is in our bodies. It exists for us. So just to reiterate, just Katherine Dunham and her work in the kinds of dances and dancers she put on stage, in her teaching philosophies, and her own personal statements, and in certainly in Southland, was as much a social activist as she was a dance artist and cultural anthropologist. Any other questions for me? Good, I hope you get a chance to encounter more of her work. Look up, there's a few other videos on YouTube, and thank you so much for coming today. About the dance, here's a notebook. Have a good day. You're welcome. Hi, how are you? Good. Doing any dancing? Want to work on it?
Sorry, see ya. I printed off all those. See you later.
I'll send you the